Welcome to another CEO Wisdom Pod. We have Mina, that is Mehta, with us. She is CEO and co-founder at All Takes, and she also have her consulting coaching business that is called Mina Mehta Coaching and Consulting. She worked at YouTube, Google, Harvard, Amazon, LinkedIn, and yeah, all these big companies. So we're going to talk about that. Expedia, certainly another cool one. We're going to talk about big tech. We're going to talk about coaching and growth, I guess. So this podcast was brought to you by podfire.com. It's my podcasting as a service company. If you want to start or monetize your podcast, you can hit me up at podfire.com. Mina, welcome to the pod. Can you tell me a bit more about yourself and about what you're up to nowadays?
Absolutely. So thank you for having me. I'm just making sure all of my settings are correct, which seems like they are. You can hear me
They
okay. It's amazing. Okay, so I'm Minal. I'm the co-founder and CEO of this company called alltakes.com, which I started 2 years ago. And I'm also coaching, as you mentioned. So basically, my why in many ways is to really help people find their true center and operate from that place, because I believe that when people operate from that place, good things happen for themselves, their communities, and the planet. And that's always been my bent, even when I worked at larger companies, right? That's the journey I've been on. With All Takes, we're building technology that literally spans that bridge between new technologies and humanities to help people thrive. And what we've built right now is like a really amazing video conferencing platform. And if you check it out at alltakes.com, you actually feel like you're sitting in a room with other people and you feel connected and you feel engaged. And we've gotten great feedback on the product that we've built, but that's one of many in this like general sphere of bridging technology and humanity to help people thrive. My own coaching business is also based on the same basic premise, right? I specifically focus in my coaching business on women leaders in technology who get to a certain stage in big tech, and I'm sure we'll touch on big tech, who get to a certain stage in big tech and realize that the path ahead needs to look different from the path that they've been on. Whether they stay at their large company role or they move, they actually there needs to be an internal shift or an internal upgrade that needs to happen as they go on this next phase of their journey. And that's the moment that I usually coach and help people sort of go on a deep journey inwards to come out stronger, better, more centered, more connected, and creating just better things on the other end.
Right. And I see you started your career here at Expedia in the early days. So tell us about how you got that position and what you learned as a program manager there.
Yeah, so you'll realize with a lot of my story, I follow my intuition quite significantly. So I actually came to Stanford for my undergrad, not knowing what really Stanford was. I applied and I got in and they gave me money and I was like, oh, that sounds great. And so I ended up at Stanford and I thought I was going to be a doctor when I came here. And then I took my first computer science class and I was like, this is pretty amazing. I'm going to switch over. And the good thing about going to college in the US is that you don't have to declare your major the day you land, which is what you have to do in India or Singapore, which is where I came from, but you can switch. And so I switched to computer science. And then as I did that and I interviewed for jobs in my senior year, I realized that, well, I like writing code, but I'm much more excited about building systems. And so as I did all these interviews, I realized that the product manager job was the right job for me. At Expedia, they call that role the program manager job, but it's essentially the same as the Google product manager job. And so then that's the job I took. And that was the beginning in many ways of my entrepreneurial journey, because even though it was a big company and I needed a visa at that point to stay here, etc., I got to work on their luxury travel group, which was a little startup within Expedia. So got my first taste of entrepreneurship. And I guess ever since then, I haven't really looked back. Even the jobs I've had at large companies have really focused on building something new, willing something to life within those large companies.
How was it to work with Jeff Bezos?
Oh, it's incredible. I actually, when I was at Amazon, like many of us back in that era, got to present to him every 6 weeks or so on any new initiative that we had. And those meetings and preparing for those meetings, like I think just sharpens your thinking in a way that almost nothing else on the planet really does. I'm sure your listeners have heard about Amazon's process, the PR FAQ, the working backwards, writing 6-pagers, not writing like decks, and so you have to be really, really crisp on your thinking. And I think it's where I really honed my writing skills. And Jeff was an incredible leader, obviously very, very clear thinking, right? Which he knew where you were going. He knew how to like thread the needle and think about it. And he knew how to ask the right questions. And so those meetings with him, like you always left, despite the fact that you knew more about your product than he did, you always left like with a more nuanced understanding of how your product fits into the company, where your product needs to go, etc. So I think like just working with him was one of the most formative experiences of my early career.
Right, because he has the bigger picture, right? So he has the ultimate vision of all the moving parts and what he wants to accomplish. Was he gentle with you, or did sometimes he chew you out and straight dissed all your ideas that you presented him?
So I think the thing about Jeff that's different from other large company CEOs is not that he can just hold all of these moving parts in his head. He makes bets that other people would not, right? Like when you think about just something as simple as Amazon Prime, if Amazon Prime succeeded, like I was there at the company when they were willing to life Amazon Prime in 2005. If Amazon Prime succeeded, it had the potential to lose the company a lot of money, right? And he was still willing to make that bet because he believed in the flywheel and the ecosystem of how it would come together. Not too many company CEOs, and I've worked at many companies at this point, can think at like that multidimensional level. So he doesn't just hold the whole, he holds the whole in a way that is non-traditional, that many other people on the planet cannot hold the whole. And that was actually really great training for me. To your question on does he chew you out, one of the things that I loved about Jeff is he asks very pointed, direct, clear questions, but he did not behave like many leaders of that time, like yelling, getting angry, throwing things around, like all the things you would hear from other leaders of that time. Like he would ask you questions, and if you couldn't answer those questions, he would just, you could see it in his demeanor, but he'd just move on to your manager and your manager's manager, and sort of like until the question was answered. But there was no drama around it. It was all about like getting to a good place with the product within the company. And it was extremely respectful. I really think like for people who like that kind of clarity, that kind of just like specific type of thinking, that ability to work with people, the ability to be held to a high standard, that kind of training is like nothing else you'll get out there.
And if I'm not mistaken, the next level of that in empathy would be Reid Hoffman.
Reid Hoffman, very different leader. In fact, I just ran into Reid this week after 10 years, which was incredible. But Reid and Jeff are very, very different types of leaders. So Reid is very much a people person. Like one of LinkedIn's core values is this value called relationships matter. And the thing that I will say is that that is not only true when you work at the company, it's a thing that is true when you leave the company. So even now, as I'm starting my company, when I reach out to former colleagues from LinkedIn or people that have left from LinkedIn to go elsewhere, they respond to me within 30 seconds. And that is something that has been created from the very beginning by someone like Reid. Reid believes in two things, I would say: the power of the network and the ability to think strategically in a way that nobody else in the valley can think, right? So two leaders, very different superpowers, if you will. And that's what I say to everybody that I coach and everybody that I work with and people on my team is you can't be who you're not. So figure out what your superpowers are and lean into them and magic happens, right? Jeff leaned into his superpowers and started Amazon, frugal, low margin business with like massive growth potential. Reid leaned into his superpowers and built a networking platform. So you can't build a business or a company or a product based on somebody else. You got to do it based on who you are and what your superpowers are.
Huge lesson right there. And then you really had that strong pedigree in your CV, so much so that Harvard reached out to you for taking care of some of their MBA alumni, and
Yep.
You worked there for 5 years.
So that was a part-time job. So I was doing that while I was at LinkedIn and also at Google. And the funny story there is just, again, going back to intuition and knowing yourself, I left a job at a startup in 2013 and decided that I wanted to become a coach. So I actually called Harvard, which is my, where I went to business school. I knew the career development department there. Relationships matter, networks matter, all of that stuff. So I knew the career department, and I called them and I said, hey, you really need to hire me as a coach. And they're like, well, you're 20 years younger than everybody else. Why should we hire you? And I said, well, because everybody wants to be a product manager and you want somebody who knows how to get that job to help your students out. And they're like, okay, yeah, that's a good point. And so they hired me. And then I helped a bunch of their students figure out this career path, but realized I'm a technologist. I missed working at scale. And so then I went and joined LinkedIn while I was still coaching HBS students and alumni.
Let's define intuition at that point. It's the second time you mention it. And intuition to me is this gut feeling. It's just like Jeff, he has so much data in his brain and he's gone through the heart and then through the gut. And then it's really much like shooting from the hip and being right most of the time, or a high amount of the time, because you've embodied that knowledge, you fully understand it. And then now it has become second nature. That's what intuition is for me. And as we know, there's brain cells in pretty much a bunch of parts of our body, in the heart and the gut. Anyway, it's hard to explain, but that's my definition of intuition. What is yours?
I think your definition is pretty good. I think intuition starts from a feeling in your body, right? When you think about emotion, it basically, someone said it to me, it's energy in motion, like something is happening in your body and you've got to pay attention. Whether it's like a tightening in your gut, or like, you're not breathing as you're breathing more shallowly, or there's like a pain in your shoulder, or there's like a spark that lights up like your whole body. The thing is that reaction or that emotion is coming from a variety of different places. One is just all of us are consuming so much information in the outside world. Like, just think about that moment where you're like, oh, if I turn right on this lane, I'm going to find a parking spot. That's not because like you willed a parking spot to life. It's because your brain has been observing how cars are moving and like it processes it. And then your intuition says, I should turn right on the street. There's going to be a parking spot, right? So that's the external information. Then there's all of your past experiences. And by the way, intuition gets developed when you make a ton of mistakes. Like it's not like this magic thing you've made. I tried this, it didn't work out. I did this, it didn't work out for me. If I do something that doesn't make my heart sing, like I'm going to be unhappy. If I work with people that I don't fully respect, it's going to make me unhappy. Like these are things that I've tried out and learned. So you take that feeling in your body, that external set of signals that you're processing at a very fast rate, and your past experience, and put those together. And that's really what intuition, I think, ends up being in its like, if you break it down, but the way you feel it is usually something that starts in your body. And I personally, and I don't know if you do too, like I have very, like strong mindset practices. I meditate every day. I work on my mindset every day. And all of that is to develop an awareness of what's going on, right? Like so many times your body's sending you signals and you don't even notice because you haven't trained yourself to notice it. And so the biggest gap I find with people is if you just slow down and train yourself to listen to these signals, then suddenly like things happen in your world that you couldn't even imagine, because you're like just literally making that second to listen to what's going on in your body.
My brain came up with a word for one of my business, which is coaching. It's like tap into Charles' intuition as a service. I was about to get into the mindset part, yeah, tad later, because I saw the meditation question behind you. Right now, I'm not disappointing myself, but I'm definitely not on track with my meditation routine. But I'm very strong on the cerebral and IQ side, which is the podcast. I'm interviewing 10 to 15 folks a day, and that does wonders to my intuition. To me, that's the main data. Well, I mean, at this moment, right? It is accumulating as much data as possible and crunching it through biohacking and taking care of my own brain. So, but yeah, I wanna focus on you here, because what's next is Google. So you hit like all the big tech. I think Apple is only missing there. What was your experience there?
Google was a very different company than LinkedIn and Amazon. Like you think about Google as just like this massive place with a lot of little startups almost everywhere. At least that's what it felt like when I was there. Of course, things have changed since. And I still at Google ended up working on new initiatives. I worked on what we called our next billion users. So I worked primarily with, what the rest of the world calls emerging markets. At Google, we just say that, these markets have emerged, they've just emerged differently than the US. So you can't call them emerging markets, right? So markets like India, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, Sub-Saharan Africa, like these were my markets. And so I spent a lot of time in these markets and understanding the needs of these users, understanding how they use their phones, understanding how we can support these users as they come on the internet. It almost felt like we had this moment of being able to redo how we came on the internet, because, we learned so much in the first 10 years of the internet in the US, and could we actually bring people online in a better way than we came online, right? But I'm not sure we've succeeded in that, but there was definitely some soul searching and thinking around that. And then I worked at YouTube, again, focused on the next billion users. So I focused on emerging markets for YouTube as well. And that was incredible because it was amazing to think that a mother in India had access to the same kind of content that a mother in the US would, right, to raise her child, and democratizing that kind of information, crossing language barriers, crossing literacy barriers, and providing that information to people all over the world. That's a pretty darn cool thing to do.
Life-changing, is the effective altruism way of thinking, in which if I work at YouTube, I can influence 10,000 or more humans and drastically change their life just by giving them access to technology. And it's not a regret of mine, but I'm focusing on creating my own empire, and it will take time, but I would definitely impact way more people if I would work at Google and YouTube. In my opinion, do you often think about these things?
I think it's very different. I think careers have different phases. So when I worked at Google, users in my market wasn't 10,000, it was 1 billion users, right? Over 1 billion users used the products that I built. So that kind of scale, you cannot imagine at most places on the planet, maybe Google, maybe Facebook or Meta, not even Amazon, right? There are very few companies in the world that have that kind of scale, that you can have that kind of impact. And that's pretty amazing. But when you're working at that level, there's also some downsides to it. So for example, when you're Google, your brand is really important. So you don't take massive risks. You kind of build something that's a lot more incremental. And that is by design, because you cannot afford to take those massive risks as a company like Google, right? And the type of impact you have on people, it's broad, but it's not as deep. And then the third thing I'd say on following intuition is when you work at a company like Google or Amazon or LinkedIn, you are expected to be 80% that company, 20% yourself. And I think in each of us, there comes a time where you're like, no, I have something very unique to offer the world. And I need to go, I take all of my skills and all of my learning and all of my training, and then take that and build and create something in the world that only I can do, right? And so I think companies like LinkedIn, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, all of these companies are companies that people early on in their careers should absolutely go work at, because they teach you process, they teach you how to think, they teach you how to scale, they teach you how to work with people, how to communicate internally, externally, everything. You develop a skill set that is very well-rounded and very unique, and you're getting paid to do this. I'm an overeducated person, but I learned a lot more almost in those meetings with Jeff Bezos, in the conversations with Reed, in the processes that these companies have built in, that I'm taking some of them with me as I'm off on my own journey. But once you learn, then comes a moment, and for some people it's early, some people it's late, some people it's very late, but there is a moment in time where there is something in your soul that says to you, now it's time to will this thing that is within me to life. And it's not an easy journey, right? Especially if you're used to the abundance within larger companies, your really great salaries that you get paid there, etc. But it is your soul calling, and you have to pay attention to that soul calling, because if you don't, then the cost of that is very, very high. And this is the coaching work that I do, right? Because when that moment comes for a lot of people, they don't know what to do with it.
They miss opportunities, yeah, and then they feel bad about
It's not
it.
even that. It's not even that. It's just when your soul comes calling, and that's a very woo thing to say, but there's a moment where you're like, I have learned enough. Now it's time for me to go create something of my own. right? It won't stop until you respond. So the universe keeps giving you bigger and bigger signs. Things keep happening, forcing you to do it. And so save yourself the trouble. Listen to what's calling, listen to that intuition, take those steps, get the support you need, get the help you need. And go on the journey that is uniquely yours.
Yeah, I think that feeling gets suppressed a lot on this planet Earth. I think that people get money corrupted. So it's like, hey, come work here, 250K a year, and yeah, your dream, it can wait, That's
Yep.
one. And second, it's just the massive fear. Most people are not willing to take the pain and the fear. So even if they do it, it's like so scary to start a business. Everything can go wrong. So I do think that a lot of people bury their dreams for some time, and I don't think that. I think actually most of people bury them forever because it's a feeling, yes, but it's suppressed. It's suppressed by a lot of things that society throw at you to make you forget that and keep you in comfort. You know what I'm saying here?
Yeah, actually, fear, like one of the questions to ask is, what would you do if you weren't afraid? Like fear is the biggest reason people don't take the steps that their soul is telling them to take or their intuition is telling them to take. And I think that's the number one question I got when I was leaving YouTube, right? They're like, oh my gosh, like, why would you do this? How are you so brave? And for me, it's just this, when you're that educated, when you have that kind of training, right, you are very high up on this like ladder, if you think about status, right, and all of that stuff, if you care about that. So people are saying, well, you have very far to fall if things don't go well. But my approach is the opposite. The floor is very high. If you fail, like, it's not like I'm going to be out on the streets. Like people think about the distance that they fall, and like my floor is high. Like I can take risks that people can't take because I have a high floor. I can always go get a job if I needed to get a job. Not that I want to do that, ever again. I love running my own business and my own coaching practice. I love building teams in the way that I do, but I think that's really important. And for your listeners, like, I don't actually know the types of listeners that you get, but we have actually this amazing panel that we did at All Takes called From Employee to Entrepreneur, which touches on this very topic of fear. And if you want, I can send you the link and you can put it in whatever comments, because I think it was an incredible panel, not just my journey, but the journey of various people that have listened to this voice within them and taken those first steps. Very highly educated people with a lot to lose in this like fear-oriented mindset. And I think my answer is not to push down the fear. It is also not to push down what's coming up. It's to work with the fear, notice the fear, talk to the fear, use the fear, and then take the steps that you want to take anyway. Like, the fear is your partner. The fear is there to keep you safe. The fear is not an enemy, but the fear is just a tool. It's one of the tools we have in our toolkits.
My take, the more drastic and manly one, is to triangle choke the fear. So
to try and what the fear?
Triangle choke, kill it. Yeah.
No, you can't do that. You can't do it because
in my case, you can. I have tips though. So yeah, first I think that imposter syndrome is fear, and fear is false. It's made to keep you alive, but in this world, it's totally useless. We're already safe, in this world. Most of us, that is, if you live in a jungle, it's different. But you can suffocate the fear by exposing yourself constantly to stress, and eventually that's the elite way to do it, right? Like normal folks, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, but once you have thrown yourself in very scary situations a lot of time, whether it's like ultra races or doing the impossible, starting a bunch of businesses with a bunch of employees, yeah, I think you get used to it, and eventually fear just dies out. That's in my case. What's your opinion on that?
I can say though, Charles, like, I'd say what you're doing isn't wrestling down the fear. You're saying, I see you, fear, I'm going to do this anyway. And then you talk to the fear and you say, look, I did it. It was fine. So then you take the next thing. You're just running a bunch of experiments and learning and learning and learning. You're not saying, fear, you don't exist. You're saying, fear, I see you. I'm going to do this anyway. Right. And there's a difference, because if you say, fear, you don't exist, just like your soul's voice, the fear, like whether it's now, 5 years from now, 10 years, 15 years from now, it'll overwhelm your system because no part of us can be like suppressed. And I don't think you're suppressing it. I think you're actually working with it in a very powerful way.
It's interesting. I think I believe in the power of ignoring stuff, and I do think that things can disappear. That is, maybe it's if you have a very advanced mindset, because fear, or maybe genetically I'm that way. I've always taken risk, but I don't fear much, you know. For example, another situation, right? Sparring, when you do sparring, when you have another human hit you in the face, you know, that's another situation in which you can learn to maintain your calm. And you expose yourself to any situation that might be scary. So I don't have much fear, and it's the same with pain. Like I'm literally masochistic, you know, I like pain. I've turned the tables around so that anytime I find myself in a painful event, I actually like it. And that's not like suppressing, it's like judokaing stuff around. And let's say that fear has a very small, it doesn't have a seat at the table, you know, it's like in the corner, it's there, but because I'm human, right? I'm wired that way, but it's like a ghost, you know, and it's just like humans in your life. Sometimes you have toxic people around, well, I ignore them, you know, and it's like if they don't exist. And that is a powerful tool, because every time you give your energy to something, it grows a bit like a cancer. But I again, like your audience might be a bit different, you know, like for example, I know that in women, imposter syndrome is omnipresent in most women entrepreneurs that I talk to. In my case, imposter, I mean, I can feel it sometimes, but I know it's fear fucking with me. And yeah, and I just try to not give it any attention. And it doesn't come back, you know. I'm very zen about that, and haven't felt fear for years and years, even in deep spiritual work, you know, like fear doesn't really pop out when I do ayahuasca and stuff like that. So I think it's gone. Almost gone, that is. So that's
No, I
another
understand
very contrarian way, by the way. It's not like the common
I
stuff you
agree.
hear out there, but it's
Yeah.
contrary.
I think like what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And by the way, we are, I think, wired very similarly. Like I don't feel fear of many things. There's other issues that I work with, right? But like all of us have our own psychological ghosts and shadows that we box with in our own way. But I think what you are saying is really important, which is like not that you're saying fear, I don't focus on you, but like you're focusing on something more powerful, right? Like you're not like, oh, toxic people, I don't want to see you. You're like, I'm going to work with people that actually energize me, right? And the toxic people like fall away, right? Because your focus is not on them. Your focus is on what helps you grow, right? Like to your point and the point of this podcast. So I completely agree. And I think this is the advice you're giving your listeners. And I agree, like focus forward. Don't let the shadows pull you down. They'll exist, right? But like the more you focus on what's good, the things that you want to push away, like will fall away anyway. Like you don't have to push them away. They just go away.
Right. And my style is really head on. You know, I'm always in attack mode. I've never really played defense. So that's a bit different with me. And for the record, I do feel stress sometimes. I do feel a lot of stress. Stress and fear are like different, right? It's like cortisol in my blood. And yeah, sometimes I stress and somewhat have micro fears, but I don't believe this is like my true self, you know, it's just like this body that sort of needs to learn. I view myself at the third person, and I obviously still have my stressful moments and these irrational fears, but they're almost gone. And I really like your approach and everything that you mentioned to me. I'm quite inspired by your background, and yeah, working with Jeff and Reed, and starting your own companies. Where can people find out more about you, Mina?
The best place is just on LinkedIn. So if you just go to LinkedIn, Mina Mehta, you'll find me. I'm one of the earliest LinkedIn members. I think I was member number 1.5 million or something like that. And everything is linked from there. So you can find out more about me there.
Thank you so much. That was Charles Cormier as your host, CEO wisdompodcast.com, and that was Mina Mehta.